When my husband asked me for a threesome with his best friend, I knew the time had come to execute the revenge I'd been planning for 3 years in his own father's bed. What Marco could never have imagined was that every caress he gave me, every broken promise, every night I pretended to love him while he maintained another entire family. Marco single quotes as lust always followed the same pattern. It started with lecherous looks during dinner, moved on to rough, too hard touches while we watched a movie, and ended with impersonal sex against some surface in the house. That night was no different, except for the words he whispered against the back of my neck while he took me from behind against the window of our penthouse. "Javier wants to know how you do it," he panted, his fingers pressing bruises into my hips. "He says your moans have been driving him crazy for years." I silently counted to 7, letting the disgust melt into faked arousal. "Your best friend wants to sleep with your wife." I arched my back, pushing my ass against his hips in the rhythm I knew drove him wild. "And that turns you on?" His breathing quickened. "More than you can imagine." His hands closed around my neck, not hard enough to choke me, but just enough to remind me who held the power. "He watches you, Valeria. He always has. At every party, at every dinner. I've seen the way he looks at you." It was true. For years I had felt Javier's gaze on me, but not with desire, more like a warning. Complicity. Javier knew things about Marco that I was only beginning to suspect. And his silence had been as guilty as my husband's actions. "Fine," I whispered, turning my head to look at him over my shoulder, imitating the expression of submissive lust I had practiced so many times in front of the mirror. "But it will be on my terms." In the honeymoon suite at the Ritz, where we spent our first night as husband and wife, Marco smiled, that predator smile that once drove me crazy and now only filled my stomach with a mortal chill. "I knew you'd understand." His climax was quick, selfish, like everything about him. When he pulled out of me, he did it without a caress, without a kiss, like someone finishing an annoying but necessary task. While he showered, humming a love song he'd once dedicated to me, I locked myself in the other bathroom and sent the coded message to Arturo. "The hunt opens Friday. I need the full arsenal, including the new stuff." The answer came immediately. "The study. Now. Bring what you found in the safe, and get ready for the truth about Diego." Those last words made my heart stop. What did our son have to do with all this? Arturo was not just my lover. He was my mentor, my confidant, my personal avenger. Our first sexual encounter had taken place in this very study, surrounded by family portraits that watched us with frozen smiles, silent witnesses to our mutual betrayal. "You came," he said, closing the solid oak door behind me with the lock only we knew about. His hands, those hands that had built an empire from nothing, took my face with an urgency that still surprised me after 3 years. There were no preliminaries. His mouth found mine with a hunger Marco had never shown, not even in our best days. 3 years of secret encounters had perfected our dance. Every caress, every bite, every moan was at once pleasure and vengeance, tenderness and retaliation. "Show me," he ordered against my lips as he unfastened my dress with expert fingers. I handed him the phone with the photos I had found that afternoon in Marco's secret safe, not just the ones of him with Sophie and the kids at Disneyland Paris, but something much worse, images of Marco with a third woman, and with her, 2 little twin girls who couldn't be more than 3 years old. The image was so domestic, so joyful, it hurt more than any explicit sex evidence ever could. Arturo looked at the photos, his expression hardening in a way I already knew well. "The ring," he pointed out, zooming in on an image where the third woman, a slender young redhead, was showing her left hand. "It's another replica of mine," I confirmed, feeling tears burn in my eyes, but refusing to let them fall. "When did it become this, Arturo? When did we stop being his main family and turn into just one more of his branches?" He led me to the black leather couch that had witnessed so many of our confessions, his expert hands finding the knots of tension in my shoulders that only he knew how to undo. "My son is a sociopath, Valeria. Like his mother. Elena wasn't just unfaithful to me, she created parallel lives the way other people collect shoes, each one in a different city, each one ignorant of the others. And us?" I asked, watching our intertwined reflections in the dark window that looked out over the city. "What are we in this harem of lies?" His smile was sad, wise, marked by the scars that 50 years of life had left on him. The price of his betrayals. The inevitable consequence of his actions. He then showed me what he'd managed to obtain, not just financial documents or proof of other affairs,
but something much more valuable. Elena's secret diary, Marco's mother,
which he had kept all these years. "Read this," he said, pointing to a page marked with a red ribbon. "The night Marco was born." Elena's words jumped off the page with terrifying clarity, written in an elegant,
furious script. Arturo will never know this child is Raphael's, that in my veins, and
in this baby's runs the blood of the man who destroyed his family. He is my perfect revenge, the fruit of my hatred and my final triumph. The world stopped. The walls of the study seemed to close in around me, the family portraits whispering secrets that should never have been revealed. "Marco, isn't your son?"
I managed to stammer, feeling the ground shift under my feet. Arturo shook his head slowly,
his eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and pain that broke my heart. "His father was Rafael Mendez, my greatest rival, the man who murdered my brother in that car accident that was never an accident." The pieces began to fall into place with terrifying precision. "That's why you never loved him the way a father should love his son." "On the contrary," Arturo corrected, his voice loaded with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show.
"I loved him too much, with an intensity that scared me.
Until I discovered the truth. And by then it was already too late. He had already inherited the evil of his real father. He already carried in his veins the poison his mother and Raphael injected into our family tree. He took me in his arms. And this time the sex was different, slower, deeper, charged with the weight of the truth we now shared. Every moan was an oath of loyalty, every caress a promise of revenge, every kiss a reminder that we were soldiers in the same war. On Friday, he whispered against my skin as his hands moved over my body with a possession Marco had never shown.
"It won't just be about exposing his affairs.
It will be about reclaiming what is mine by right. What is ours by destiny." As I got dressed, my eyes fell on a photo on the desk. Marco, Diego and I smiling on the beach during our vacation in Maui. A perfect family. As fake as everything else in our lives.
"And Diego?"
I asked, feeling that old maternal fear that always lurked at the edges of my heart. "Does he know? Does he suspect anything?" Arturo came closer, placing his hands on my shoulders and looking at our joined reflection in the antique mirror that had belonged to his grandmother. "Diego is my blood, Valeria. My real grandson. His blood is my blood. And I will protect him with my life, with my fortune, with my last breath." When I left the study, the truth echoing through every fiber of my being, I knew I had crossed a point of no return. The threesome Marco had planned as his perverse fantasy, as the final trap to get rid of me, would become the stage for a revelation that would shatter not only our marriage, but the entire history of the Sterling family. And I, the betrayed wife, the woman who had once believed in eternal love, had become the perfect weapon for a revenge that had been brewing in the shadows for decades. Thursday's family dinner was as tense as I expected. Diego, our 10-year-old son, seemed to feel the electricity in the air, shifting restlessly in his chair as he played with his mashed potatoes. "Are you okay, Mommy?" he asked, his intelligent eyes studying my face with a sharpness he shouldn't have at his age. "Just tired, sweetheart," I answered, smiling with a sweetness I didn't feel. Marco shot a look from the other end of the table. "Your mother's been very busy with her projects." The contempt in his voice was barely disguised. Arturo, seated at the head of the table as always, cut in with his usual authority. "Valeria has a gift for business. Better than some who were born into this family." The jab did not go unnoticed by Marco, whose face darkened.
"Yes, I've noticed how
close you two have become lately." The danger in his words was palpable. I quickly changed the subject. "Diego, how did your math test go?" While Diego spoke excitedly about his academic achievements, I felt Marco's eyes on me, full of suspicion and something else. Did he know? Or was it just the usual jealousy he felt toward his father, who had always shown more interest in me than in him? After dinner, while I helped the maid clean up, Marco cornered me in the kitchen. "I have a surprise for Friday," he said, his breath heavy with red wine. "Something that will make our night even more memorable." "Oh, really?" I replied, keeping calm even though my heart was pounding. "What kind of surprise?" His smile was a lewd gesture. "Javier won't be our only guest." My fingers tightened around the kitchen knife I was washing. "Who else is coming?" "Someone from the past," he said cryptically. "Someone who claims to know you very well." When he left, leaving me trembling in the kitchen, I knew the game had become more dangerous. Arturo and I had underestimated Marco. He also had cards of his own to play. Later, in the privacy of my dressing room, I went through the contents of the safe I had managed to open that afternoon. Besides the photos of the other families, I had found documents that froze my blood, medical reports declaring Arturo mentally incompetent, falsified powers of attorney, and most terrifying of all, a detailed plan for Marco to take total control of the family business, stripping not only his father, but also me and Diego of any inheritance. But what disturbed me most was a worn photograph of a woman who seemed vaguely familiar, a young woman with an angelic face, with the same green eyes as Diego. On the back, in Marco's handwriting, my first love. My only regret. Who was this woman? And what role would she play on Friday night? When I finally fell asleep, it was with the certainty that we were all dancing on the edge of an abyss, and that only one of us would walk away alive from the trap we had set for each other. Revenge was no longer just an option, it was a matter of survival. And I, who had once been the victim, had become the most dangerous hunter of all. The rain pounded against the windows of Arturo's apartment, where we had taken refuge for the final preparations. Each drop seemed to mark the rhythm of the countdown to Friday, to the abyss we were inexorably heading toward. Marco has been making some interesting moves, Arturo commented as he looked over his tablet, his fingers gliding across the screen with the elegance that characterized all his gestures. He's transferred another $3 million to the Cayman Islands. But the most curious thing is that he's scheduled a dinner with the director of Willow Creek Sanitarium. A sudden chill ran down my spine. The same sanitarium where they locked up your Aunt Elizabeth? The very same, he confirmed, lifting his gaze to me. It seems my son has decided to follow in his real father's footsteps in more than one way. The revelation took my breath away. Rafael Mendez, Marco's biological father, had been responsible for Arturo's younger sister ending up in that very sanitarium after she discovered his affair with Elena. Do you think he... I couldn't finish the question. Arturo nodded grimly. He's laying the groundwork to get rid of anyone who might get in the way of his plans. And unfortunately, Valeria, you're at the top of that list. As I processed this new layer of horror, my phone buzzed with a message from Marco. Don't forget the surprise I promised you for Friday. I guarantee you won't see it coming. I showed the message to Arturo, whose expression darkened. Let's play his game, he said at last. But we'll bring our own cards to the table. The next day, while Marco was supposedly at a board meeting, I met Javier at the art gallery that used to be our safe place for discreet encounters. I found him standing in front of a Klimt painting, but his eyes were lost somewhere between horror and resignation. You have new evidence, he said without preamble, without taking his eyes off the painting. And you're afraid, I replied, stepping up beside him. With good reason. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the reflection of my own torment. Marco showed me something last night. Something that changes everything. My heart sped up. What is it? Photos, he whispered, his voice cracking. Of Carolina. With your son. The world stopped. What? Not like that, he clarified quickly when he saw my expression. Photos of Carolina taking Diego to a park, buying him ice cream, visiting schools. As if she were evaluating something. Or someone. The pieces began to fit together with terrifying precision. Marco doesn't just want to get rid of me, I realized suddenly. He wants to replace me. And Carolina is willing to become Diego's new mother. Javier nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. The worst part is that it looks natural. Diego is smiling in the photos. He seems to know her well. I remembered then the multiple work meetings of Marco's that coincided with Diego's outings with his Aunt Carolina. The puzzle pieces locked into place, forming an image so monstrous I could barely process it. There's more, Javier said, lowering his voice even further. Marco has a file on you. On your family psychiatric history. I don't have any psychiatric history, I answered, confused. But your mother does, he revealed. And your grandmother. Marco has been gathering evidence to show that your mental stability is questionable. That you've been on the verge of a breakdown for months. I understood then the depth of his plan. He wouldn't just accuse me of infidelity and promiscuous behavior. He'd try to prove that I was an incompetent, mentally unstable mother who deserved to lose custody of her son. Why are you telling me all this, Javier? I asked, studying his anguish-lined face. Because a week ago I found something out, he confessed, his voice trembling with genuine emotion. Carolina is pregnant with Marco's child.
The blow was so brutal I had to lean against the wall.
Are you sure? I ended up at the OBGYN appointment by mistake, he explained bitterly. Marco gave me the wrong address for a supposed business meeting.
When I got there, I saw them coming out of the doctor's office together, laughing with an ultrasound in their hands.
As I tried to digest this new layer of betrayal, Javier handed me a USB drive.
Here's everything I've gathered about their plans.
Use it well.
When I left the gallery, I felt the weight of the revelations pressing on my shoulders like a slab of stone. This wasn't just about affairs, it was a meticulous conspiracy to erase me completely from my own son's life. That night, in Arturo's refuge, all the pieces of the board were laid out on the table literally. We had spread out documents, photos, financial records, and most disturbing of all, the full report from the private investigator Marco had hired to spy on me.
It's worse than we thought, Arturo admitted, pointing at a photo where I appeared with Diego at the park. He's been documenting your every move for months, looking for anything he can use against you. And did he find anything?
I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Arturo looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read.
He found what he wanted to find.
Late nights out, mysterious meetings, changes in your behavior.
All presented out of context to build his narrative. He then pointed to another series of photos, the same ones Javier had described of Carolina with Diego. This is the most worrying part. She seems to have been building a relationship with your son for months, probably with the intent of presenting her as a more stable mother figure. Tears blurred my vision.
Diego, does he love her?
Diego is a child who misses his father, Arturo said gently.
And Carolina has been playing the part of the loving aunt who fills that void.
As I struggled to hold back the tears,
Arturo showed me something that made my
blood run cold, a preliminary legal document, where Marco was requesting full custody based on my emotional instability and promiscuous conduct, with Carolina listed as an
appropriate substitute maternal
figure. There's still more, Arturo said.
And his tone made me fear the worst. About the woman in the photos you received.
My heart lurched. The one who looks like Diego. Her name is Isabella Morales, he revealed. And she was Marco's girlfriend in college. The one we all believed had died in that car accident, Marco always refers to as the great tragedy of his youth.
The walls seemed to close in around me.
Are you saying that
she never died?
Arturo confirmed. Marco sent her away when he found out she was pregnant.
He paid her to disappear and build a new life far from here. The revelation was so monumental I could barely breathe.
And the baby?
Diego, said Arturo, and in that single word thundered the blow that would destroy my world. Isabella is Diego's biological mother. You
were never able to have children after the miscarriage you had at the beginning of your marriage.
The floor shifted under my feet.
That's impossible.
I gave birth to Diego. I remember it.
Marco kept you drugged throughout the pregnancy, Arturo explained, his voice heavy with genuine sorrow.
Isabella gave birth, and he made you believe that you were the one who had delivered. The doctors, the nurses. They were all bought. I remembered then the hazy fragments of that period, the mental fog, the memory gaps, the strange feeling of disconnection from the baby I was supposed to have brought into the world. I had always chalked it up to postpartum depression. Why? I managed to stammer, feeling my world splinter.
Why would he do something so monstrous? Because Isabella refused to leave him, Arturo explained.
And he wanted an heir, preferably one who didn't carry Rafael Mendez's impure blood.
So he used you as a fecati incubator while he pushed the real mother out of the picture. Tears were now streaming freely down my face. Does Diego know? Arturo shook his head.
But Isabella has come back. And Marco has invited her to the Friday threesome. The final revelation was so brutal, so calculatably cruel, that it knocked the air from my lungs.
He hadn't just stolen my motherhood, now he was planning to force me to confront my son's real mother in the most humiliating setting imaginable.
There's something else, Arturo said, and in his eyes I saw a flash of the truth he had been hiding. Isabella is my daughter. The world stopped for the second time in minutes.
What? Elena couldn't have any more children after Marco, he explained, his voice filled with guilt. I had an affair with the housekeeper years ago. Isabella is the result.
Marco found out a few months ago, and he's been using that information to blackmail me. The layers of lies and betrayals piled up into a mountain so high I could barely see the top. We were all pawns in Marco's game, all caught in his web of lies. What do we do? I asked, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. Arturo took my hands in his. We go ahead with our plan. But with one modification, Isabella will be on our side. She wants to get her son back, and she's willing to help us in exchange for having a place in Diego's life. As I left the apartment that night, I carried with me not only the documents that would destroy Marco, but also the knowledge that nothing in my life, neither my marriage, nor my motherhood, nor my relationship with Arturo was what it seemed. And the most terrifying thing of all, the woman I believed myself to be, Valeria Sterling, faithful wife, devoted mother, passionate lover, had never existed except as a character in the macabre play Marco had been writing for years. Friday was no longer just about revenge. It was about survival. It was about reclaiming my identity, my story, my truth. And I was willing to destroy everything and everyone that stood in my way.